and welcome to part 2 of painting your dragon. With the basing as done as it's going to get for the dragon at this point in time, I'm going to move on to the base. And and I'm using the term basing, which is usually used to make the base of a mini, but what I'm talking about here is laying down the first coat of paint, coloring everything that base coat. Now you usually choose what your medium color is going to be when you lay down the base coat of paint. For Mr. Dragon here, I'm going with kind of a darker red, and I want things to stand out, so I don't want to go with a brown stone or even kind of stand. So I decided to go with gray for the stone here. I don't have a lot of grays, though I have a couple of different kinds. Again, Folk Art, Apple Barrel. I also have this Art Studio acrylic. This is kind of stuff that comes in painting kits. Usually, here's a kit for acrylic painters. These little tubes come in there. These kind of kits are kind of nice to pick up art supplies cheaply, because when they get too many and nobody buys them, or when little girls and boys get them for Christmas and never use them, they end up in garage sales and things, and you get them pretty cheaply, and they're pretty nice. This is a really nice dark gray, usually not named. You know the color by the label. But for this, I'm probably going to go here with Dolphin Gray. And that's what I've chosen as my medium color for this particular project. I've used this gray quite a bit. It's kind of warm, meaning it has some warmer colors mixed into it. What is this? I'm going to put it on my palette. These things are handy, a little bottle of water. I've seen some people use pipettes for your wet palettes. Just squirt some water in. Try to use warm water, not cold. Press it down, push out any bubbles before you make a mess. This is only regular cooking parchment, so it feels kind of like phyllo dough, but it's not made to last through anything like this. Shake the paint really good. I think my neighbors would kill me if I had one of those fancy paint shakers. Still haven't mixed up gunk. Pre-mixed it. Right now I like those little pots for stuff I use all the time. I keep my floating medium and my blending medium here in these two little pots, and I kind of mix it as I go. Usually take it out with a little palette knife. I save my plastic ones for digging paint out of jars. I don't like to do that with my metal ones. No particular reason. I just don't. And again, I'm just laying down the base, so there's you want to thin things out pretty good. Kind of see there's my gray and that little blob of white extreme right next to it is the floating and blending medium put together. I have a little old metal measuring spoon. Get some water from my clean water cup. I don't need a lot because I am using the wet palette. It's a couple drops. Only because I really want to thin it out. Again, my cheap brush, specifically for laying on the base coat. I'm just going to kind of mix this up here. Really good. Until I can't see any bubbles, clear bubbles. I don't care if they're gray bubbles. Kind of draw it out on the palette a bit. Some more water will get into it as it hits little pockets of wetness from the wet palette. And then I paint. Now, because my medium color is so light, I'm not going to really need to worry too much about it. Again, I'm using a white primer. I just kind of want to cover it here. And what'll happen is I'll get a darker, planning to wash with this baby later on. And then highlights will be done in other grays for the ambient light. And then again, if you've seen the other video, you know that I am planning to play with object-oriented lighting coming from Mr. Dwarf's hand. Again, this is a Reaper miniature. Came in a big old black box called Red Dragon, something I still yet to find what miniature this is. Like I said, the box is long gone. I got it at a store in their bargain bin. Found out later that, and it was marked down and in their bargain bin. Found out later it was neither supposed to be marked down or in their bargain bin, but by then I'd purchased it, so I wasn't really too keen on going to pay what they really wanted for it. These horizontal surfaces, I'm not washing, so I'm just trying to line in really thin coats of paint. I got a little bit too much water on my brush there, so I'm just gonna, that's what paper towels are for. But again, this color is very light, so I'm not gonna spend a lot of time putting it down. In fact, kind of like, especially with the Apple Barrel and folk art paints, the grays are really deceiving. So, you're going to think, I mean, this is what the bottle looks like, and if you look at the bottom here, let's see here. That's the color of the paint, and this is it on the brush. So it comes out a little bit lighter than what you see in the bottle. It's not necessarily true for all folk art or Apple Barrel paints, but for the grays it seems to be. So, just want to darken it up a lot. But I'm going to say that pretty much for the washes. There's a lot of crevices just like the dragon. And I'm washing way too much of this, so I need to dry off my brush a bit. This particular wet palette I'm experimenting with, I'm not sure I like this, just using the cooking parchment paper. It seems to soak up too much water, where the Predator paper in P3, the stuff, you have to boil it for it to work well. They don't tell you that. In fact, you'd think you wouldn't have to, but some of the other more artist-oriented wet palettes, that's what you have to do. And one of the tricks to using the P3 palette is boiling that paper that comes with it, and then it works really well and doesn't soak up. But this parchment paper kind of soaks up a bit too much, and it beads on the top here. So I'm not sure that I like that. You're probably thinking, then why did you add a few drops of water? Well, because this does need to be thin. Even for this. Or if I leave any bubbles behind, I make sure to run a dryer brush over those, get rid of those bubbles. Here's an example. Let's see if you can see this. Of why Gorilla Glue is not the best idea. Right here, you'll see that hole. That's actually a glued in area. Probably should go in there with some gap filler. But right now, because I reprimed it after I scraped everything down, not too worried about it. I'm going to give this skull a quick wash with this stuff. Trick if you get too much paint there is to use your paper towel, dry your brush really good, and you can go in there and it'll wick up. Again, this is not a very good brush. Don't want to use this for detail work. This is just simply to lay down a bunch of color quickly. Trying to get as much of the rock covered as we can. We'll go over it a couple times, just like I did with the dragon, to get this base coat on. Again, you don't want to lay it down too thick because it's a lot harder to clean up than it is to put more on. I'm really only just painting the rocks. I mean, you'll see, I got that little skull, but you know, I'm kind of going around the treasure chests and gold pieces and little jewels that are scattered about this base. A lot of those are not going to get too much of a base color. They'll be picked out with highlights and blending later on. Basically what's happening, you can kind of see here, is now it looks like that I have kind of a more solid, especially this color, a more solid prime on everything. Which is not the case at all, of course. This is, like I said, I do my primer pretty thin. Took some classes at a convention in Arizona, and one of the things that was kind of interesting was showing the difference between doing a thick coat of primer versus, well, now, you can do a thick coat and still not clog up too many of the details. True. But shadows work a lot better with a thinner coat. And you don't need as much as you think to get the paint to stick. Which is why you're putting on the primer coat in the first place, is so that the paint sticks a lot better to the metal. I have not tried Knee Reaper's Bones yet. It came out recently. I'm not sure. They kind of look goopy, so I'm not really sure how detailed they are. I noticed they re-put out the Townsfolk in individual packs. I have a couple of those hanging around that I'm working on. So I was thinking of grabbing a Reaper Bones miniature that's the same as one I already have in the computer, and comparing the two. It's hard to tell because they use that white resin or plastic or whatever they use to 3D print them out, and it's hard to pick out detail when you're just looking at them in the store through the blister pack. Which makes me sad because, as I said before, one of the reasons why I really like Reaper miniatures was the amount of detail. And that's hard to maintain. I mean, detail seems to be the first thing to go in art. Eventually you just get tired of doing that complete level of crazy detail. Or sometimes you don't. I mean, there's artists that never get tired of it. But there's a lot that do. I'm going to call this particular experiment with this little chess piece. Wet palette, kind of a failure here with the parchment paper. It really, too much water comes up. It holds the water well, but I mean, this palette isn't very full of water at all. There's just enough to soak the paper towels underneath, and it's all coming up and beating through the parchment paper in a way I don't like. That's okay. I got, plenty of this stuff, so if my P3 box wasn't still full of I'm taking little bits of thicker paint off the lid here. Wasn't still full of red paint, then I'd be using that. I would have switched. So I'm probably going to empty this thing out and start getting some foam to go in here, because I will say that this particular box, this is a candy box. Can't even tell. It's acrylic candy box that I got. There you go, there's the label, Ferrero. It really does seal well. And I put some green paint in here on top of this in the water, and I left it for about 3 days. And the paint is still fresh and wet. Probably a little bit too wet, but very usable as far as that goes. So I think if I switch to a foam base with a paper towel on top, and either go raid a hobby supply store for some wet palette, some larger wet palette paper, I'll be happier. Or, if you listened to my last video with my little talk about just using foam and no paper, try that out. We'll see. I kind of like to have a bigger one. I tend to spread out my paint a lot. I mean, I only put a tiny, like quarter of a dime size dab of paint, and I've already spread it out across half that freaking box. The box is, about 3/4 of a foot by 3/4 of a foot. Again, I don't need to cover every little bit with this since I'm using a white base. You know how you use a black primer, so you can kind of cheat on the shadows a little bit. Well, when you use a white primer, you can kind of cheat on the highlighted areas a bit, or at least the medium areas, not necessarily the highlights. You really want to paint in those highlights yourself and not just leave them untouched with the primer. It doesn't look as good with the paint. Clean off my mistakes with a little bit of water. I don't know if you ever watched Bob Ross as a kid or heard of them later if you're not as old as I am. But, when I'm cleaning off my mistakes, I always think about how there's no mistakes. There's just happy trees and new things to do. And it's not the end of the world. Try not to get too stressed. I've had some miniatures destroyed in the past by various accidents. The ones I worked a long time on. And I'm kind of bummed, but it's another video I want to make of fixing some of those. And some of them can't be fixed because, well, the dog ate the arms. Because we never found the arms, so I'm assuming the dog ate them. And I've turned, you're not going to see this. I'm trying to get underneath his tail. It's curled up around a rock and kind of a boulder. So I'm just kind of cleaning up the red paint there. This will be a difficult one to control the washes on when I do those. Simply because I can't use my vise. I have a little hobby vise that you can take the little tiny miniatures in, this size. And stick in the vise whichever direction you need so that the wash flows off that direction instead of onto other parts of the miniature. Well, this is a little bit big and heavy to do that with. I need a pretty hefty vise, pretty well secured to a table, which I don't have, so never mind. So there'll be a lot of holding this one by the base. Luckily, it's a very solid base, so you don't have to worry about too much about that. Some of this here, can't really see it. Let's see if I can bring it up close for you to see. So part of that Gorilla Glue mistake here. You kind of see it there. It kind of looks a little bit like lichen down in here, kind of fuzzy. It's going to be lichen now when I go pick out some of the details. I've got some nice greens for that, and browns I can use. Again, there are no mistakes. There's just happy whatever. I think he called them happy accidents. I have to look that up. I used to love watching him as a kid. One of the remarkable things about Bob Ross was that, he used oils like you would use acrylics, blending them together while wet. Because traditionally with oils, you let them dry a long time before you did anything, and it was a very long process, and he made it very quick. Always taught people how to do it very quick. I'm not a big fan of oil paints, though. I like my acrylics. Basically, with the really thin paint, you just keep going around. What's nice about this one being so big is that by the time I get back to the other side, that side's dry enough for me to add another coat, which with a smaller miniature you'd have to wait, give it some time to dry. And again, this is just my medium color base color for this. I kind of like to build up both my shadows and my highlights and not rely on the base coat or the primer for either. And because, but for the base coat, especially since so much of it eventually gets covered up between everything that you do, even if it's just light glazes, something like this, you don't have to worry too much about covering every little piece. You definitely see some parts where the primer didn't get down into the crevices. The darker wash is going to go down there anyway. And like the dragon, since I chose not to use a darker color for the stone, again, I didn't want it to completely bend in with the dragon. I want the dragon to pop a little bit. It's not as important to get into all the as many little crevices as you can, like it is with the red. There's little baubles kind of in these. You can kind of see them, coins and stuff, even in the lid there. That looks pretty empty. So even though I'm going to go ahead and just paint the inside here of this lid, I'm going to make sure to use really thin coats. This Huckleberry Brown. So that I don't gunk up the details, so that when I go in and get some washes in there and highlights, I can pick out those little jewels and coins in the bottom of this lid here. I use a little flexible light. This one's a a bright LED light clip-on thing. I'm going to clip it onto the edge here of my bookshelf and kind of position it where I need to. Open it all. So there we go, the chest. And kind of look, there's some pots and urns and a little sword and just all kinds of little things, spades, bones. And a lot of these I'm going to pick out with color and highlights as I go. So I'm not too worried right now about picking out a ton. I think there's there's another chest here in the back. Kind of see right here. But again, I'm going to have to paint some of this Gorilla Glue as mold and lichen in the cave, since it's conveniently blobbed over this particular chest a bit. And I didn't notice when I was scraping it off. It's okay. Remember? Oh, there's no accidents. There's no wrong. Only happy stuff. If you're another miniature painter, you're probably tearing out your hair every time I say that. I tear out my hair every time I say it. Yeah. Because you want to get it right. I mean, miniatures is not exactly a cheap hobby. Even if all you do is paint them. In fact, if all you do is paint them, it might be a bit more expensive than just buying them, slapping them on the table. Never actually played any straight miniature games. Wanted to. Confrontation, that's that French one I was trying to think of in the last video. Really love their minis. I always wanted to play that one, but there's never anybody in my area who had any interest in it. In fact, the stores that carried Confrontation minis always had them on sale, so I have a ton to work on, and I've painted quite a few just because they bought a bunch, because they're beautiful miniatures, but dang, nobody ever wanted to play it. I don't know if that was because of the rules or what have you, but around here a lot of people play Warhammer. I just don't know that I'm that into it, or at least never been in a position to learn the rules. You heard that? That was my cat going slightly insane. Woke up the dog. One of the reasons why I'm doing these little videos is I don't sleep very well. So when I have a particularly big bout of energy in the middle of the night, which at this point it's about 3 a.m., I'm doing something productive. Instead of just watching movies on my iPad while I paint. Or playing video games. I like feeling productive. Okay. Let's see here. I just want to get the front of that one, the back so you can see. So just kind of got the brown going. This chest is pretty full, so I don't really need to get too much in there. There's some people like to do their highlights first, meaning they base and then they highlight right away. before they do anything else, sorry, I use the word base a lot to mean different things. In this case, I'm talking about putting on their primer, and then they highlight with another primer, or sometimes paint them in, and then paint from there. Other people will put their base coat down, they'll do a wash, and then do their highlights and blending. That's kind of what I do. Some will wash and then base. Some will wash, dry brush, highlight, and then base. With putting down the base color and everything. There's a lot of different ways to do it. And I find that depending on what you need to do, especially with this one, I mean, frankly, I'm going to go in and get a good dark wash in over the entire miniature, probably before I do any detail or highlighting. Only things I know are going to be really different and not exactly detailed. And I got some horns here to do. There's some skulls. It's a chess piece, a knight, lots of cups and random things in here that are really going to be better picked out once some good dark washes are stuck in. I knew someone once, they black washed the whole thing, which is what you're probably going to see me do here. Don't be afraid. I black wash with inks, really diluted inks, just to kind of get the dark edges, and then I'll wash again with lighter colors. When those settle in there, they settle in correctly, we'll cover up the black, but then they would take white and dry brush the whole thing wherever their light source was, or sometimes they did everything all from top down. And then they dry brush again with colors over the white so that it really popped out. Okay, so that's it for right now. Next, we're going to tackle some base color on Mr. Dwarf here. And go from there. So thank you for watching, and I hope you have a great night.